Welcome back, or welcome to the Next Level Podcast. I'm your host, John Harris. And as always, we're bringing to you unique perspectives, different ideas and leaders in the industry that come on the show and tell you their perspective on the security industry, on leadership in the security industry, and just give you different touches and flavors of what it's all about. Today, I'm super excited to have with us Baer Halvorson, the host of the Security Today podcast, amongst many, many other things, many hats that he wears and voices that he puts into the room. But I'm really, really excited, Baer, to have you on the podcast today to have this conversation. And first and foremost, why don't you give us your background, kind of how you got into the industry, a little bit about yourself, and kind of how you got from where you started to where you are today.
Yeah, John, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm thrilled to be here. I will congratulate you. You are popping my guest podcast cherry. I've never been on a podcast as a guest. I've done hundreds at this point of podcasts, but this is the first one that I get to be a guest on. So I'm like jazzed, Yeah, so I started in the industry about 11 years ago, in the security industry. I was newly married, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. At that point, I was selling Hot Wheels on eBay for a store, and we pumped out about 40 grand a month on Hot Wheels. So that's for another story. But weird thing, and I was like, this probably won't last forever, so I need a career, right? So I decided I would look to what a locksmith does. I don't really know where that came from. I didn't know any locksmiths, but I was like just perusing things, and I kind of landed on locksmith. And I got a mail-in course from Foley Bellsaw that they like sent me, like this jankety little key machine and like some tools and stuff, and like these chapters and books to go through. And so I got certified there. And then I had a friend whose their friend's dad had been a locksmith in the area for a long time. So that's kind of where I got started. Got apprenticed in that for about 3 years. And I was helping run the shop. And then I broke off on my own and got into a van. I thought, I can do this, right? And that was pretty naive. I also didn't know any entrepreneurs in my family either. So took a lot of bumps right on the chin. I didn't get hit too hard with anything serious that some business owners get, but it was a lot to learn. So I went from there. And then I decided that it was kind of going okay. I was doing a lot of residential, and I wanted to kind of dive more into commercial. So the way that I thought I would do that is I would kind of put the business on hold for a couple of years. I would get into commercial, like low voltage or security, and then I'd come back to running my own van, and then I would know how to do it. Well, it didn't really work out like that, but I got into a couple of contractors. I got into a national service provider after that I was running in Kansas City, is the area that I grew up in. And then I was also helping out in Omaha, which was it's like 3 hours north of Kansas City. And so I did that for a little while. And then because of the pandemic, it kind of shut things down in Kansas City. So I was running to Omaha like 3 times a week, driving up there, working a full day and driving back. That actually is kind of where the podcast got birthed, that I put on the Security Today podcast, because I was spending so much time in the car, and I just read Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours. And I was like, what am I going to do to use that time wisely to help my career? Because I don't want to be this tech to Omaha my entire life. So I was like, I couldn't find anything when it came to security podcasts. If you wanted to search on the cyber side, they were a dime a dozen. You could find like 40 guys on Spotify who are talking about cybersecurity, which I knew nothing about at that point in my career. And I was looking for the physical side. And so I decided to start that podcast of like just news and highlights, a 20-minute podcast, just to talk about what's going on in the industry, and hoping that the next guy who has to drive to Omaha 3 times a week has something to listen to at least once in that week. So that's kind of where it all started. And then because the pandemic shut stuff down, I kind of made the jump to the desk on the engineering side, and I was working remote there. I got a strange opportunity in Montana for a couple years of doing really high-end residential AV. That was kind of like a fever dream, but now I'm back at the desk doing security engineering again. So it's been a pretty colorful experience in the security industry because it's been from a lot of different perspectives. I've dealt with the client from different capacities. I've dealt with the job and what it needed from different capacities. So it's been interesting, but I'm sure glad to be here, man. I'm sure glad to be where we're at now. So
I love that, man. A lot of unpack there. So I want to ask a few things. One,
yeah,
we have a shared experience. You and I chatted a little bit, before on a different session before we hopped on and recorded, and
yeah.
I shared that experience with you of pandemic road trips. So at the time, I was a consultant, um, traveling to clients. Fly out Monday, come back Friday, traveling, kind of doing on site. I was, global risk assessments and security planning and master planning technology. Well, we had to pivot and do that remotely. But I had one client, and I had a number of clients in Chicago, and so I live in Minneapolis, and so I drive, full like 6-7 hours, go to Chicago, stay in a hotel. The hotels are empty. I'm like the only person there. It's super odd, but I wanted to listen to podcasts. And at the time, same thing, that the only podcast at the time, and this is before I knew Leo Des really well, was
Mm.
his access control podcast. It was the only one. I think I listened to every episode. They were like 20, 30 minutes long, some were longer. On one trip, I listened to, 10 hours of Leo Des telling me, interviewing some, I wonder if those are still out there. I go back. There were some really good interviews and some really awesome people in the industry that he spoke to, but again, there was nothing. And similarly, on why I started my podcast was leadership and personal development with a specific focus on the security industry, because there's just no one talking about, sharing stories and basically, what you just said, like the 11 years of your journey, try so much that someone can learn from that. So hopefully we can unpack a little bit of that here today. And one thing that you said, or that jumped out to me a little bit was, um one, seeming your willingness to take on interesting and new opportunities to kind of learn something new. So all the way from a mail order kit to learn how to cut keys and be a locksmith, to moving to Montana and working in high end residential stuff, to like, whatever interests you. Have you always been, curious and intrigued and trying stuff new? Is that something that happened more on professional side? Like, am I reading that right? That's kind of an attribute that you have, and like, where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess growing up, I had I had the opportunity. I did have a lot of it, different experiences. I was never like from a parental side of things, I was never pushed into one direction, or if I picked football, I would just do football for the next 6 years. It was never like that. So it was
Yeah.
kind of like, do you want to do it this year again? And nah, not really. Okay, what do you want to do? So maybe that led a little bit to it, but honestly, it was when I started learning locksmithing, and locksmithing was, like I said, out of the blue. Some people would, be like, oh, it was like a divine experience. It just hit me one day. I don't know where it came from, but whatever it was, it led me into kind of this pride in trade.
Mm,
And I don't remember if I was reading something at the time um, that was maybe drumming that up within me, but I came away with the idea that, if I learn this trade, it's something that they can never take from me.
mm,
And I felt at that time with, the first kid kind of on the way and a wife and a career, it's like they could take my home, they could take my car, they could even, the proverbial they could take
right.
my family members, my kid. But at the end of the day, no matter where I'm at, that trade is within me and I can just do it. And
Yeah.
so, um, that kind of led to maybe a confidence that, well, I can learn things, I can learn whatever interests me, or I can learn whatever I want, and I want to do the things that I do excellently. And so if I can learn this piece of it and it'll make this piece more excellent, then that's always been something that has been a driving force, from the inside out.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's this like independence in knowing you could always, if it all fell apart, you could
Yeah.
always pick up and as long as you had your tools and your mind, you could build it again. And I think there's a certain like underlying entrepreneurial gravity to that even if you've never been an entrepreneur, I think people who have realized it. So it's one of those things like once you open Pandora's box and you're like, this is what this is all about. Like,
Yeah.
and you kind of alluded to it, right? Like you were on your own, then you decided to, join an organization, but probably always knowing like if this doesn't work out, I don't give a shit. I can always go back,
Yeah.
start that
Yeah.
truck back up and go and go do, build it again, right? So there's a comfort and independence and I think a confidence that comes from knowing that no matter what, you can take care of yourself.
Yeah, with some of those bigger jumps in my career and talking with my partner like about what like is this a risk? Should we do this? Should we not? I often tell her I'm like, "Well, I can always crawl back into a van. Like at the end of the day, I can just crawl back into a van. We'll get bread on the table. It'll be okay. Let's take this risk, you know?" So,
Yeah.
yeah, that has driven a lot.
No, it's funny you say that. I always tell my partner, like, yesterday's the worst day we're ever gonna have. Like,
Yeah.
well, like we'll figure it out, right? And for
Yeah.
15 years we figured it out. And so it's an interesting mindset when you can just know that you've built up a war chest of skill set and capability that no matter what you can figure it out. So that leads me to my kind of a next topic. So you know through that, and I think you and I have this in common in different ways, like there's a generalist about you, meaning like you can do a lot of things and you have a lot of knowledge, and there's some things you're probably deeper in. And I had a friend on the show a couple of months ago, his name's John Pirelli, and he had this concept called spears and shields. And he said you can only carry a couple spears, meaning you can only go really, really deep in a few areas. But that's why you build a shield where you can go really, really wide in a lot of different areas and complement your spears. And then you go get other people and have all their spears. And then now you have a team and you find the specialist to help you in the areas that you need it, but you have your areas of specialty. And I think when I look at the world of technicians and engineers and just technical people in the industry, I know a lot of really good ones, and a lot of the really great ones I know are they're going to be retiring soon, and it got me thinking about it. And it's not even actually it's not even we'll talk about it in a technical sense, but I talk about this all the time, and it's one of the things that drives me. The passion that I have for leadership and performance development in the industry is because we do have a talent problem, meaning we have more better people who are going to be in their 60s than we do in their 20s and 30s. And we got to find ways to get great people in and keep them in and help them get from good to great faster. It took you 11 years, took me 15, like what to get on that journey. How can we help other people do it in 3 to 5? And we
Mm.
don't have to be, at least I subscribe to the fact that we don't have to say, well, hey, you need to go through the same gauntlet I did because that's how you learn. It's like, well, do they really though? Like if I can help them not have to take all those bumps and bruises and it'll help me by helping them, like let's do that. So anyway, getting to the question, you're in it a lot. You interact with a lot of different folks. How do you feel about that? The talent that we have, specifically young professionals coming in. Are you seeing new people coming in the industry? Are they staying? If not, why? Like, what's your general sense on the security industry from a technical talent perspective?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I mean, I think that it's kind of layered. We have a couple of things that we're fighting against with that, and I know that I just heard the other day from there's a gentleman on LinkedIn, and he's on a lot of like reels or TikToks or whatever you want to say, that he talks about the trades, and he's trying to like bring awareness to the trades, and
Mhm.
it was something like we need 30,000 electricians every year until 2030 to make up for the ones that we're leaving that are getting out of the trade.
Mm,
And it was like, I think that we kind of have a cultural problem that the trades were, um, they weren't, what should I say, like coming out of the industrial revolution, it was like, oh man, the trades were very important, to put in infrastructure to kind of build us to the world that we needed. They very much supported the middle class. They were seen as something that was an honorable profession to have. And then we got into the age of technology that kind of took our, in every sense, took our attention,
Mm,
and distracted us from a lot of different things outside of this conversation. But one thing that maybe it distracted us from was that physical trade, being there on the ground, putting it physically in. And we got enamored with marketing and with digital stuff, and computers and coding. And while all of those things are making a better life, we are losing it in the youth of promoting or maybe evangelizing a little bit about that trade sense. So yes, I agree. I think that the people coming into the trade would seem like a trickle from the people who are going out of the trade. And unfortunately, I also feel that the older generations that have been in the trade for a long time, whether that's low voltage or security or electricians, they are not super competent in educating the ones below them.
mhm.
And I think that they probably had a hard road. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of resentment of like, well, it was hard for me, it's going to be hard for you. And I think that that's a thorn in the side of some of our technicians coming into it. With all of that said, though, I know that some of the younger technicians that I see at my work, Sprinter Business Solutions, where we have like 20 or 30 technicians as an integrator, and I'm very well connected through Tech Knowledge Worldwide with a bunch of integrators that have technicians under them. The technicians that are coming in at a younger age um, are are very they're that shield. They're very widespread because they grew up in a generation that already had the digital in front of their face all the time. So
Mm,
when they come in and you can slow teach them the physical, it's like they can also pick up the back end. Where I feel is maybe in the past it's been a problem because you got a guy who pulls wire, he terminates a panel, he does all of that, and it looks beautiful. But you stick a computer in front of him, and he's like chicken pecking and like misspelling an email. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we don't have that anymore. We just have to focus on getting the physical skills in front of these people or in front of these younger technicians, and not just physical, like what you're doing too, like giving them a sense of leadership. I also feel like that digital thing in front of them for growing up has kind of caused them not to not to be as driven in the initiative of like being the jack of all trades,
mm.
and it's not because they find it useless. It's because they haven't been demonstrated it in a way that it's like, oh my gosh, this is enjoyable and fulfilling. And it makes me feel as if I'm having more of a purpose if I can learn these multiple things. So it's very, very layered.
Yeah. Mountain Movers, John checking in with you. And I want to remind you, if you don't know, Apex Performance has coaching and training and online courses available for you made by security professionals for security professionals to help you take your leadership to the next level. So if you like the content we put in our podcast, if you're interested in learning more about what we do, click the link in the show notes or go to apexperformance.one. That's ONE, because we're number one. Learn more about what we do. Love to work with you. Now back to the show.
I
Yeah,
was,
yeah, it's not. There wasn't going to be a silver bullet there. There's a lot of
yeah, yeah,
context and subtext
yeah,
to it. I think one of the things you said that I always want to highlight is, we get enamored with the digital things, with the software and like the fanciness and the coding and all that. And at the end of the day, none of that stuff works if someone doesn't put a computer in a rack and wire it up and put it on a read. Like, it
right,
all sounds great, but on behind it, like that stuff can't run without the most powerful quantum computer running the most prevalent AI models and large language this and that data lakes blah blah blah. There's a physical computer somewhere that's connected.
yeah,
That someone ran the wire, someone put the power in, someone did this. So it's all comes back to the necessity to have the physical technology and the connection and someone with the know-how to connect it and make it all work. And I think we don't like, it's I don't know that we don't like to talk about it. It's just that it's less sexy to go have that conversation about the hardware side of it. And like you said, the nothing, one of the things, and maybe I'm just because I'm a security technology nerd, nothing is more beautiful than me than seeing a designed, deployed, and wired panel in a closet with like all like there's some of these videos or like IT fail memes and stuff like that where you these wire and when I was a consultant I'd see those all the time. And like when you see like a life safety power panel put up where everything is just squared away and everything's color coded and it's labeled and you're like, somebody gave a shit
Yeah,
about that. I'm like,
yeah,
that's that trade craft and that craftsmanship. Like, there's this story, this book I read called The Carpenter, and this guy, he's building a like a cabinet for this custom cabinetry, and he's painting the back of the panel that's going against the wall, and his son's watching him do it, and he asks him, Dad, why are you painting the back of that? And like, no one's ever going to see it. He's like, but I will know. Like, this is my craftsmanship, and I don't cut any corners. I always do it the best. And like that's something that I think, in the great tradesmen that you have, like my brother-in-law, he's in his mid 30s. He's an electrician, and he's like the only younger person electrician I know. And so it's interesting, his dad was an industrial tradesman as well. And so it's, they've kind of passed that down. But all the other things that he does that are kind of fun and interesting, his attention to detail in his trade craft is like second to none. And so there's this also beautiful habit that can be created out of that. Like some of the greatest sales leaders that I know in the industry started in a truck, started
mm,
crawling around, pulling wires. So I think there's attributes that you can get out of that. And those are maybe some of the stories that need to be told about, there's a path and a growth and a development out of those roles too. But to your point, if that next level mindset of wanting to kind of get better and aspire to something bigger isn't inherent in you, and you're just like, I just want to go in and plug in some wires and leave for the day, which is like, I'm not saying everybody has to be wired that way, pun intended, but if I think for those who are, I think the misnomer is that if I get into an engineering role or a technical role or a trade role, like I'm 40 years I'm stuck in it, like there's no way out, which just isn't the case.
yeah. And no, I wholeheartedly agree. And so I on Instagram, I've been on Instagram for a long time, and that's where a lot of my technician connections in the industry have happened because a lot of them got on there. And I was wiring a bunch of cans in my career when I was working for that service provider. TSI, by the way, they're if I can shout them out, they're an excellent company to work for. But it was in those like I remember one time I got called down to a can, right? And it was like 2.5 hours into the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And so it's like this little, like, just, cell service colo that I was in. And I went in and I popped the can, and there was maybe like 15, 20 doors at the site. And it was wired impeccably, right? Like it was just excellently wired all the way through with the labels, just like you said. And I was just so happy to see it because I felt that that was what I was attempting to do every time that I wired a can up. And this one wasn't me, it was someone else who had wired it. But I felt in that moment that this can was teaching me things just by looking at it
Mm.
as a technician. And so I wanted everything that I touched after that. And I like started this like Instagram called Clean Can Mafia. And I was just like reposting all the cans that I could find that were wired well. And I just felt like if you could see it as a technician that's out there, maybe not putting in the best of work, you would be like, oh, it can be done that way. Oh, you
Yeah.
can, you can put the two wires in your chuck of your drill and twist them out so that when they're lined in the can, they're like a straight line, and you can Velcro like this and label like that. And I just felt like it was when you put the excellent work in, you're not just doing it because you know that the back of that is painted, but I knew that at some point I wouldn't be the technician at that colo, that somebody
Yeah.
else is going to pop that can at some point. And I was always wiring for that guy,
Yeah.
because I wanted him to open it up and be like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like, who did this?
Well,
You
and there's
know,
two things there, right? There's your craftsmanship of being
yeah,
like, I have pride in my work, and when someone opens this up, they're gonna be like, so if they knew it was you, if they said, oh, I'm going to one of Bear's accounts, or I inherited a customer, I know this is going to be squared away.
yeah,
Or the most interesting thing you said that I've never heard before is that they can learn, like when they pop that can and they see it, they could learn something. Meaning
yeah,
like, I didn't know it could be done this way, or I never thought about doing it this way. And I learned that there's a, um, I'm forgetting Bo's last name, but there's this sales engineer works for Linnell S2. His name's Bo. He's on the West Coast. Shout out to Bo. He's the man. And when I was an end user, he was in the pitch meeting, and his demo is basically what closed the deal. And when I worked in business development for them, he was one of the sales engineers who supported me, and he built my demo kit. And the intentional detail that he put into the demo kit, into my little Peloton case and everything, kind of configuring my sales demo, was unbelievable. And it made me be able to like orchestrate a demo like a beautiful song, and just captivate and have it all work together. The way he built out his sales demo and the way he does, so I just knew, man, back when he was a technician, like everything he touched was gold. And he was like, he's the only one I wanted to, like, again, I remember, like, it's been almost 10 years since I've known him, and every time I see him, I embrace him. He's a great dude. And I just know that over his career, just think about how many things he's touched and how many people he's trained and learned from him. And that's the I think the opportunity that we have to kind of come full circle to what you talked about is more people like yourself and like Bo and like others in the industry who want to teach others and like lift each other up. And again, at worst case scenario, make your work your calling card and teach by doing. I think that's a great lesson to learn from that, is like, you're going to leave something behind. What do you want it to be? Do you want it to just say like, hey, I got this done as fast as possible? Which maybe for some, when it's incentivized to say, I got to do 10 jobs today, and that means each one can only take 45 minutes, you're going to get a 45-minute quality job, whether, regardless. So, the kind of a different discussion around values and incentivization from service providers, but, it definitely is worth thinking about kind of what message it sends when the work quality that you leave at a job when you're done.
yeah. And I think that it can really have that domino effect to kind of harken back to the question of like technicians coming into the industry. If we can encourage and lift up the technicians that are here now by praising that excellency of work, and really seeing the security industry as not just this hang and bang culture of getting alarm contacts on the door and stuff like that, but something that is truly a craft, truly something that at the heart of it, when you're at the panel, it is a little bit of artwork. And if we can encourage the technicians in that are out there right now, what it'll do, and I try to use a hashtag a lot when I get onto this educational piece of hashtag be the better tech,
Mm,
because it's the idea that you can be the better tech. It's within you. This is a craft. You are a technician. And so if you encourage them to do that, and they gain that pride in their work, then the work that they're doing maybe leaves their mouth outside of the job site.
mm.
Maybe they tell the next guy, their buddy, hey man, you don't like pushing cars, or working for enterprise or whatever. Why don't you come work with me, man? We do this, and I got it on my phone because I've been taking pictures and sending it to Bear to show him how good I'm doing. So like, if we can encourage that base set that we already have, I think that will encourage others from outside to come in, and we need it. I mean, I'm concerned about it. You asked that question. I do have concern over it. I have concern in certain pockets of it, like the good alarm tech that knows relay logic.
Mm.
That guy's dying off. The locksmith is in a lot of hurt right now because most locksmiths that are out there are sitting over 50 years of age. They have a small shop, and they might still just be pushing brass. They haven't even touched a door lock or a contact and the knowledge that they have, that knowledge base, isn't being handed down. And I worry about the locksmith specifically. I'm kind of going on a rant here, but it's because I do think that with some of the throwaway culture that we have in the construction industry, we could lose the locksmith in that that door lock doesn't work anymore. Order another one, just replace
Mm.
it.
Yeah,
You
just
know, and
replace it. Yeah.
yeah, and we're losing that trade knowledge that could come in and repair and just cause something to have more longevity, which is really just better for like humanity if we still have this underlying notion of we're here for longevity. We want good things. We want good things to work for a long time. And the locksmith brings that just in the trade alone. So I am concerned about some of the technician spaces in the security industry that could go away. Um, and I mean, if you get into them now, though, and they dwindle down, you could be making mad money. But it is something that I think we should be focusing on as an industry for sure.
It's a great point. I think there's a misnomer that technology will just solve all things,
Yeah.
that you can somehow create I mean, we have this conversation often in the industry. It's a prevalent one right now around um, digital versus analog keys and badges. And that, hey, why can't everyone, digital credential on the phone? It's just not going to solve every problem. I had um uh Lindsay from the CEO of Badge Pass on the
Yeah.
podcast a couple
He's awesome.
months ago. She's a fantastic human being. Her and I had a great conversation. I was on her, they do a little kind of like mini podcast that I was on, and talking specifically about why I think the physical badge, and to some extent the physical key, isn't going to disappear, because
Yeah.
there's high percentages of the population where mobile isn't feasible. And like it just, and so those think like, one, that if it breaks, just replace it. I mean, the industry's somewhat incentivized to do that because they can sell you another thing, but then
Mhm.
that's something you got to throw out, right? So there's like an environmental social governance component to this around, you know keep something operational so that you don't have to replace it, so that we're not filling up garbage heaps in certain places. And also it's more cost effective. And so if you don't have to replace 100 locks a year, and you can just service them, like, can you use that budget? I'll use that to buy the new fancy thing or the new technology, or invest in other places, and not just tossing out stuff that could easily be fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. No, I
um
agree. And I will tell you, when I was a locksmith, like 8 years ago, when I was running in a lock van, they were already humming about, the physical key is going to go away. This and that. And just being boots on the ground, I can tell you right now, that's bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Like, it might go away in your CEO's office, but if you
right.
walk down the street and you look at every single door, they all got keyways on. So they're not
Yeah.
going away.
Well,
It's just,
well, I remember back, this is in like 2016, 17, when I was a director of security for aerospace company, and our head of engineering had come over from, so I worked for the aerospace segment of United Technologies, which is a parent company of Linnell at the time. And so he had come over from the engineering organization that developed Blue Diamond. And so he's like, why can't I get Blue Diamond on my office door? I'm like, you sure can. Let's do it. And so we put a badge reader on his door. We put the Blue Diamond on his door, do the whole bit. Um, you know, then back then, right, you didn't have some of that wasn't as enhanced that it was today. So he left his phone in another room. You know how many times I had to walk over there, unlock his door for him? Often enough, right? It is because I had the physical master key. So like, even under those circumstances, you still need a backup. Life safety rules the day, and you're gonna have a need to get in and or out of the room regardless of what kind of fancy new tech you throw on the door.
yeah.
So in that same vein, kind of shifting gears here a little bit, where in the spaces where new and innovative technology makes sense, where it is making an impact, or in your role where you're seeing it, what in particular excites you about where we can go as an industry, or what, either a category of technology or technology that you're experimenting with, or just in general trends, what have you, excites you over the next 3, 5, 10 years, that you think is going to be impactful for us in the industry?
Yeah, so I know that like I'm coming from my roots a lot in the conversation so far, where I'm like, technology bullshit. We need this, we need that. But no, I will say that like I am excited about the technology coming down the pipe because there's a lot of ways that right now, and I can only imagine that they grow exponentially moving forward, that you can pair things in the security world, in the hardware world, and the logical world that is going to cause a couple of things. One, it's going to be that the user experience is going to be getting easier with a security measure in place, and that security measure is getting stronger and more robust. So to see both those trajectories heading up is really exciting because I do think for a long time we have had an industry where it's like the higher you take that security, the less your convenience comes down because we were only playing in the physical world.
Mm,
So if I wanted 12 Fort Knox locks on this, and I had to put in a keypad, and like there had to be your lockbox keys with two people using it at the same time, your convenience just plummeted. But
right.
now, because of the logical world and because of the cyber side of things, first of all, it's going to open it up to a ton of opportunities, even for that technician, which we didn't really touch on, but like the technician in the industry today has many paths ahead to climb, to grow, to become extremely skillful in one certain avenue or niche, or become broad or widespread for a company and do a number of things. So there is that, but I am excited to see that like I can have the user experience of something very convenient, like maybe my phone has a credential on it and it's geolocated. I don't even need a reader at the door. I can just walk in, and when I pop that door, I get my lighting track to my office, or the HVAC kicks on this side, so it's eco-friendly and it's saving my company money. And the user experience is just wonderful at this point. But at the same time, my phone credential or the reader that is on the door that I'm using is using OSDP verified, or it's using STIDs SPP or SCP or something, like protocols that are making sure that it is verifying me as me. Like for instance, Veritas. I'm dropping these names because they've all been on my podcast, but I think they're really really cool. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so the thing is that like me as the individual or the user, that kind of geeks me out personally. But like for instance, my wife or my buddy could give a shit, but they do like that it's convenient,
Yeah.
and it's assuring to them and their mindset that they are getting a secure thing. That it's not like, oh, this could be easily hacked, or someone could show up as my identity, and that's going by the wayside while we're still gaining that robustness and that user experience. And I think that mindset, that's something else that I really do preach, is that security is a mindset. Because at the end of the day, if I lock down the site and it's just 100% bulletproof, but the guy walking in doesn't know enough, and his mind is like, hey, I got to look over my shoulder, or this really isn't doing much, then he's not secure. And you haven't gone that final mile, and that site is not fully secure because his security is mindset at the end of the day. So I think that providing that to users who maybe know nothing about security, while also making it more convenient for them to interact with it, is something that the industry is doing really well right now. And I think it's headed on uh, a healthy path.
No, that's a really good point. I always felt that in the past, you had to make that trade-off between compliance and convenience, and it was very hard to allow for both to coexist, and whether or not and I think part of that was our inability to accept the fact that uh, certain applications of security technology that were used in we'll say like entertainment or hospitality could be naturally transitioned over into what I refer to as the high security or enterprise marketplace. And
Mm-hmm.
again, like there's certain places, like one of the examples that I gave when I was talking to Lindsay was um, I worked at a government contractor. I had closed areas where we did top secret government work. Like you can't bring nothing in there. You can't bring a phone. You can't bring a card. Anything that transmits anything. um, you couldn't bring in that room. So that completely negated the usage of certain technologies. But that was, one 20 by 20 piece of a 300,000 square foot building everywhere else, right? And so when you go back to like traditional physical security principles around security in depth, layers of an onion, and the fact that taking a risk-based approach against when you design your whole security. So if I were to design a security program for a mom and pop bar or a Fortune 100, I would take the same initial approach, like where are your assets, what are your risks? Did not mean to fire his name, but that's awesome. I wonder if I'll record that. I just inadvertently set off my fireworks from my Zoom. What are your risks? Where are your assets? What's the impact? And what are the appropriate countermeasures? I always told, if I make it 100% so that only, everybody with the right badge and everything can get into the building, and I had, and treat it like TSA, then we never get any work done and the company would go out of business. So, like, is that worth it to make sure I could say I unequivocally can state that every single person who came in the door is who they say they are and ran their badge and this, that, and the other. In my business, that didn't make sense. At an airport, at CIA headquarters, totally makes sense, right? So there's also like what environment are you operating in, but when you can start bringing down that, or I guess raising that convenience category without correlatingly negatively associating the bringing down compliance or security. I think that's what we're seeing now. Is before it's kind of a one-to-one, right? If I raise convenience, I lower security and compliance, and those are inversely correlated. Now it's like, maybe 10-to-1, where it's like I can put convenience way up and maybe I lose a little bit of security because you have to in a certain way, right? Because of whatever you're doing with it. But maybe not, right? I mean, again, even though I just said I wouldn't agree with it universally, if I was using a mobile credential that was through an app that was uniquely identified via someone's digital identity that I know only they could use because it uses two-factor authentication on their phone, like that's pretty damn strong security and high convenience if it's in their pocket and it's got Bluetooth or NFC where it can just touch the door and open and walk right in. Right. So, I think we're still maybe a little bit ways from that Jetsons experience that I
Yeah.
talked about, where you just like approach a door and but I've seen stuff like I know there's a couple technologies that I've seen that can do facial authentication with as your credential, like what Alcatraz does, and Tina and the gang over there, like, they're to make it universally applicable at a cost point that makes sense. Maybe we're a little ways away from that, but not a decade away. Like it's I think closer than people realize.
Yeah, and I also love that you mentioned the theory of it, that security theory of defense in depth. You'll see like security theory within SEPTED. All of those things are beginning to kind of trickle out of the, like, I don't know what you would say, like the brass lined military pocket into this commercial environment. And so now you might get a integrator or a technician that works governmentally and also works high end enterprise that now has mom and pop's bar, and they know how to approach it in a way and taper it down, but still apply security theory to it and make it a safer space, which is what we're all trying to do. So that's also one thing that I am excited that is kind of, coming out from behind the veil to the normal security integrator. And it's something that I try to push on the podcast all the time, is that bridging that gap and bringing that security theory into the actual boot on the ground. They may be going to understand that they need to point the camera in this direction or not put it over here, or light this or put a nice piece of art on the wall over here, and all of a sudden they're creating a safer space and a safer community. And that's what we're all trying to do. So
Oh,
that's like,
that's such an amazing point, and it's something. So I think in the past, similarly to what started on the call, there's been this perceived air of importance around security leaders, and I put myself in even in that category, right? It's like I got my CPP and my PSP, and I've been in the industry for all these years, and therefore I'm the only one you can come talk to for real security advice. Or like, let's equip a technician with some commonsensical approaches to be able to apply general security theory, which it hasn't changed in 30 years, maybe 100 years, right? Basic security theory and septet principles are evergreen and universal. And
Mhm.
so if we can equip them to be able to have the same person who's installing it make some commonsensical decisions on what's the best way to approach it and how to create a secure environment, well, my consultant friends are going to be pissed because it'll cut out a lot of their deals on overcharging people for a rinse and repeat report that they sell for 10 grand. But it would definitely upskill. And I'm really glad to hear that's the kind of messaging, Barry, that you're pushing out there, because that makes them, one, more connected to the mission. You're doing more than just plugging some shit in and turning wires, right? You are creating a safe, secure environment and helping people and keeping people safe. Like that's I had Don Marone and Benji Bollick have been on my podcast in the past couple of weeks, and both of them said this. Benji, in particularly, around like why he's in the industry, because he feels connected to the mission around keeping people safe. And I think when you talk to most people like us who have been in it for a decade or more, who stick with it, who get passionate about talking about it, they feel the same way, right? There's a compelling need to help keep people safe, and that's kind of the driving force behind everything that we do. Um, as we land this plane here and kind of wrap things up, last question I want to pose to you, man, is um, are there any things that you see that, like, what's holding us back as an industry? What are the things that are um, in our way from us fulfilling our full potential? And I'll leave that kind of generally vague and open to give you agency to take it wherever you want it.
Um, you know, I I feel that some of if we would have had this podcast like just 5 years ago, there would have been some hurdles that I could be like, hey, this is a problem. But I, I just attended ISC West for the first time, and I kind of got to shake all the hands of like the people that I've been talking to on the podcast, and it just feels like we're kind of overcoming those hurdles like right now, like we're
Mm,
in that moment. So I think that one problem that the security industry has had in the past is that guarding of information, whether it be the locksmith who's like, I'm not going to show you what the inside of a lock looks like. I know that I've watched YouTube videos where locksmiths are like, I can't believe you're showing this to the criminals. It's like, okay, calm down. And you also have like that other aspect of it where the consultant or the CSO, the C suite is like, they're just technicians. They don't understand risk management or governance of a site or anything like that. But and it all kind of siloed this information that I feel as if now, because of the conversations around technology, because of the conversations about how to build a safer environment that are going on, it's bridging that gap, and we're getting the guy who pulls the wire and the guy who signs the consulting document in the same room, or they're speaking about the same things, and so that hurdle's not really there anymore. And then there's other things like the integration between hardware and software might even 5 years ago have been a problem, but now there's kind of this click or this light bulb that went on that's like, oh, we can integrate all of this. Like we should want to play as let's say like as Dormicabo, we should want to play with Handwall, or if we're this company, we should want to play with that. So it's allowed for kind of that hurdle to go away. So I feel as if there's nothing really that's like pressing right on the nose that like, hey, this is the security industry's problem, this, that, and the other. If we don't get over this, we're gonna die. It's just not like that. And I do want to just touch back on, what like Benji Bollick said to or Bolick to say that he, feels like he's contributing to this mission. That's another thing that I also like to preach is that we as security professionals live left of bang. Bang being the event that is either the gun going off or the security event stealing assets or crippling a company's reputation, whatever it be. We live left of that, but we live left of that with the same importance as the people who live right of it. So the police officers, the doctors, the cybersecurity professionals that have to come in and clean up an incident response, like all of those people seem very important because it's the need that is needed right then. But the people on the left side of that are just as important. And if you start to understand that you play in that field as like as important as a doctor, because you're trying to thwart the things that would ever get to his plate, then or her plate, then you start to see yourself as like, oh, I am I am this important. This wire does matter. This security engineering design does matter. This client meeting does matter. And so maybe that's it. Maybe I wanted to touch back on that just because I love that message. But maybe if there's anything that is holding us back, I would like to see it resonate more out of security professionals' attitudes and words that they're seeing themselves as important as the people that some of the community kind of recognize as highly important people in an incident that goes on, you know?
Well, I don't really want to say anything else after that, man, because I feel like that was probably one of the most significant ways we could wrap this up, just evangelizing the importance of what we do left
Mm,
of bang, preventing, or enabling the uneventful day is what I always used to say. Trying to keep the bad things from happening and supporting those who do respond to it when they do. So, uh, with that said, man, anything else you want to add? Anything we haven't covered? I mean, like last words of wisdom to anyone listens to this who is either in the career, trying to design a career, or develop, or trying to reach that next level.
yeah, I'll say two things. The first is that what I feel that the most advancement that I've gotten out of my career in this industry is not feeling a certain way about asking any questions. When I jumped ship from the locksmith and got into my van, he didn't ever put electronic locks in. So when I was running my van and I was getting people who were asking, "Can you put a camera here? Or can you put this here?" I was going to like ADI and SES distributors at 9:30 in the morning and to eat a donut and drink a diet coke to listen to some ZK Tico rep talk about what they're doing, but it would be raising my hand and being like, so how do you like what's the difference between normally open and normally closed? And the rep would be like, not really no. But the guy sitting next to me would be like, oh, that's this, that, and the other, because he's been in a van for 40 years.
Right.
So he's asking the dumb questions that maybe you would feel like the entire room would look at you and go, why are you here? Well, to ask that, I'm here to advance. Because if I can get that question asked, because you know that egos don't run shy in our industry. So there's going to be a guy who wants to tell you that he knows the information. Then I get to garner that, I get to gain that and kind of progress through. And if I hold that importance of who I am as a security professional to the world, then the more that I can gain, the more that I can bring in, the more valuable and an asset that I can be, not just to the industry, but to the world and the community around me. And so I would say that. And to listen to and follow this podcast and the Security Today podcast on all platforms. So that'll help you
Love
too.
it. Well, Bear, man, I appreciate you being with me today. I'll definitely link to your podcast in the show notes as well, so people can check you out. I'll put your LinkedIn there too, and all your socials so they can follow you, check in on what you have going on. Appreciate you, man. Keep fighting the good fight. Appreciate everything that you do for the industry, for humanity, man. Like there's a broader mission that we serve, and I'm happy to be in that fight with you. And let's go do great things.
Yeah, John, thanks so much, man. Thanks for having me on, and I'll try to be back soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you.
Thanks.